We welcome everyone to ESQ Law Practical Lawyers Academy webinar series. We are delighted to have everyone here. My name is Tosi Shulanke, and I am the administrator and head of training at ESQ Trainings Limited. At ESQ Trainings Limited, our mission is to expand the frontiers of continuous professional learning. We achieve this by providing the highest quality accredited continuing legal education in a variety of formats for African lawyers and businesses. We are also committed to the development of a robust and easily accessible, comprehensive source of practical information and continuous legal education and professional development for African lawyers and their clients, thereby boosting access to justice. We offer courses across various areas of law, which we categorize into academies. Like we have litigation and other dispute resolution academy. We have intellectual property law academy. We have our construction and capital projects academy, capital market academy, and many other academies. So we have tagged this webinar series, Launch Our Webinar Series, as they are slated to hold at 1 p.m. during lunch breaks. They will hold 3 times every week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. However, in order to accommodate our Muslim participants, the Friday webinars will hold at 11 a.m. After every session, we provide the resources in easily accessible formats for everyone who is interested. We also provide trainings on other topical issues and other areas of law like fintech, cyber law, power and energy. And at the moment, we are currently in registrations for our 12-week virtual distance learning course on power. It's titled The Dynamics of Power Contracts, Regulation, Contract Negotiation, Documentation, and Project Financing. It commences on the 16th of February, 2021. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. If you're interested in power, please don't sleep on this. To get more information about this, you can send a mail to o.shulanke@esq-law.com. The focus of today's webinar is corporate governance in 2021. Today we'll be learning about the present state of corporate governance and the interesting developments that evolved in 2020 around the world. We'll also be considering predictions as to which developments will persist in 2021 and beyond, as well as exploring in details some practical governance issues that professionals might encounter while working or acting with international joint ventures. Our lineup of experts today will reflect on the impact of COVID-19 on all aspects of corporate governance, global trends that were developed in 2020, corporate governance trends that will impact boards and directors in 2021, international regulatory developments that corporate governance professionals should be aware. So today, we have the great privilege of networking and connecting with our panelists on the work they do every day on these issues. So while the webinar is going on, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. At this point, I am very delighted to introduce the moderator of today's webinar. She is Dr. Richie Izziako. She is a corporate governance, ethics, compliance, and sustainability specialist. And she's also the Chief Executive Officer of L Values Advisory. Dr. Richie, over to you, please.
Thank you, Tosin. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
A distinct privilege and a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm very pleased to have this conversation around the subject matter of corporate governance, and especially the key issues that are affecting boards and other corporate governance practitioners and stakeholders, given the current realities that we face, and we've been facing since the year 2020, and now as we enter into, in fact, we have entered into 2021, and we can see the dimensions that matters have taken. So I'm very, very pleased to be here. Tosin, thank you again for that introduction and for the brief background that you've given us. I'm very grateful to my colleagues, Bidemi, and Dr. Nosike, who have both agreed to speak with me at today's program. I haven't seen Dr. Nosike yet. Oh, there he is. He's right there. Okay, I'm quite relieved. Yeah. So, Tosin, please, could you go to, can you, because you are the host, can you help me to share my screen? So the format we're going to take is that I was advised by ESQ that I would deliver my paper and let my colleagues also deliver theirs, one after the other. And then thereafter, we will take questions from the audience. Okay? So Tosin, I'd like you to please help me project my paper, please. Thank you. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you, Richie. I'm just getting to hear that I'll deliver a paper.
Oh, wow.
I thought I was the only one.
There
was no mention of paper, but it's fine. It was supposed to be a discussion according to the brief that I was given. But let's hear you, Doctor, since you've done your paper.
Oh,
and then
wow.
Then we can discuss. Bidemi, how are you?
I'm very well, Doctor.
Good to see you.
And you too. Very good to see you.
I'm glad that I have gurus in the house. These are people that you can wake them up from sleep and they'll deliver you paper on governance anytime, any day. Yes, you guys need to do better next time, please. You need to communicate appropriately. So I've just tagged it in line with what ESQ said, corporate governance in 2021. Corporate governance, so I'm going to look at governance itself, definitions, pillars, and principles, just briefly to give a background, essentially. And then I will look at the challenges of the 2020s and hope that we will discuss issues around sustainability and how we can how these challenges can be addressed, because there are actually consequences where the challenges are not properly addressed. There are consequences, there are implications, both for businesses and for nations, in fact, as a matter of fact. So I'll go quickly to governance. Well, to understand the concept of governance, and I must apologize, my voice is a bit off. I've been quite ill for the past few days, so my voice is a bit hoarse. Do bear with me, everyone. Thank you. Simply put, governance is maybe described as making sure things are run well, and it originates from the Greek concept of steering, the art of steering boats. And another concept has been that of separating roles. And therefore, you look at the concept of the generals and the soldiers. So you have a situation whereby the generals are the ones who make strategy, who direct, how the wars should be implemented, but they don't actually carry the guns and go into the battlefield. That is left to the soldiers, the foot soldiers. Generals stay behind the scene and direct how these things are done. And those generals can be likened to our board of directors, who are not involved in the day-to-day management of the company, but they are still involved in the oversight and direction in which the company goes or follows. And they have that responsibility of monitoring closely to ensure that the participants, the governance participants that are involved on a day-to-day basis are actually doing what they're intended, what they're expected to do. So it's about how people choose to collectively organize themselves to manage their own affairs, share power and responsibilities, decide for themselves what kind of organization they want for their future, and implement those decisions. So there's a whole lot involved. There's the choice, there's the issue of choice, the issue of collective responsibility. And there is the issue of actually managing the affairs, determining who will do what, deciding the kind of organization and implementation, and ensuring, that all these decisions are carried out. So it involves putting processes, structures, traditions, and rules in place. And of course, it also involves a consistent commitment to implementing all these things. Okay. So in terms of corporate governance, we now come to the concept of the corporation concept, which speaks of ownership resting in ownership of an entity resting in a group of persons whom we describe as shareholders. Quite honestly, there are different kinds of names, nomenclature you may find in different contexts for shareholders or equivalents of shareholders. So you could have stockholders and so on and so forth. Okay, and then this introduces the agency problem and agency theory. Now, the agency theory says essentially that these shareholders, having appointed directors to run the business of their company, because the shareholders are not also involved in a day-to-day basis. The directors are even more involved in a continuous basis than the shareholders, because shareholders come together maybe like once a year, once in 15 months, according to the law, or in unique cases or unusual cases where the CAC approves once in 18 months to come and get a feedback on how the organization has been run. So there's this agency theory that says that, okay, it means that these directors are going to have the opportunity to be running the company for a whole year before shareholders have a chance to actually demand or be given a report on what has happened. So much could happen in that time that the shareholders may not support, may not necessarily support, or may not be happy about. And so this gives rise to what we call the agency problem. So corporate governance has come actually to address the agency problem, because if directors act in a way that is contrary to the will of the shareholders, or if directors act in a way that is in their own interest to the detriment of the companies, then it can be a big problem. And that is actually the problem that corporate governance has come to address. And we know that the cases of Enron, WorldCom, Parmalat, and of course, so many examples in the Nigerian banking system and other organizations in Nigeria and beyond have also brought these issues of corporate governance to the fore. Then we go quickly to the fact that when you again look at corporate governance, if we talk about it from the way I've just spoken about, you would think then that it's just about the shareholders. So I was saying that if we look at it just from this agency perspective, one would be tempted to think that it's really about maximizing the wealth of shareholders. But corporate governance has gone way beyond just the maximization of the wealth of shareholders to also this perspective that takes into consideration the well-being or the interests of other stakeholders. So you have other stakeholders like employees, you have the directors themselves, the board itself, you would have suppliers, and so on and so forth. Depending, of course, on the type of organization, there are different stakeholders. Of course, the public as a whole as well would also be an important stakeholder. So the issue of shareholding and stakeholding perspective has become a very important subject matter in governance. Okay, so now the take is that directors should not only look at the interests of shareholders, but also those of other stakeholders beyond the shareholders. Of course, shareholders themselves are an important stakeholder group or stakeholding group, if you like. So the CG structure looks at this. So you have shareholders in general meeting who appoint directors, and the directors in turn appoint the management. Of course, the reporting also goes the opposite way, with the management reporting to the directors and the directors reporting to the shareholders. in general meeting. The IFC CG structure is quite similar. It also points the arrows to demonstrate all those other relationships I mentioned. So you see that the shareholders provide the funds or capital which the management uses, and the management, of course, provides transparent reporting back to shareholders in general meeting. Then, of course, the shareholders appoint or elect and dismiss the board, and the board represents and reports back to the shareholders. And then between the board and the management, you have regular reporting and updates from the management to the board, and guidance and supervision from the board. Definitions. In terms of definitions, fits all. Different concepts and different definitions have been put in place over time by different people, depending on the circumstances of the situation, and especially depending on the perspective of governance that a particular person or group or body is looking at governance from. So you will see that some definitions tend to favor the shareholding perspective, while some tend to favor this stakeholding perspective. But for the most part, the stakeholding perspective has become increasingly more visible in recent times. So these are, I've just put these 4 definitions here. I'm not going to dwell on them. Like I said, it's just to give you a little background that I'm talking about these issues. I'm not going to dwell on them, but essentially to bring out the point that you will see the issue of stakeholding appearing, and most of them, maybe except for number 1, which is the Cadbury Committee, Financial Aspects of Corporate Governance definition. Okay, and that's actually probably the most well-known anyway, because it's short, and it was also the first definition of corporate governance, since that code was literally the first main code that was recognized. But you can see number 2 is the Mervyn King report of South Africa, which is dealing with the African dimension, looking at the issue of ethics, provision, governance being about the exercise of ethical and effective leadership by the governing body towards the achievement of key governance outcomes, including ethical culture, good performance, effective control, and legitimacy. For us in Africa, these are key points. Legitimacy, very, very important. Effective control, effectiveness of the control is key. And then, of course, ethical culture, because ethics seems to be more an issue for us. And then, of course, good performance. These things are all interrelated. And then the Mauritius Code of Corporate Governance 2016 also talks about the organizational framework of processes and attitudes. I like that word attitudes, because it actually deals with the issue of how people, the tone at the top, or the tone even in the organization, the culture within the organization. So it speaks on that same issue of ethical culture, and brings in the impact, which is the long-term continuity and success and value addition to the organization. And then there's a Nigerian one. It's not exactly what a corporate governance does, which is sitting. Okay. So there are other. I'll just mention these 2 quotes. One by Dr. Chris Pierce. I happened to be there in a class in IOD, Institute of Directors Advanced Company Direction Program in the UK, where Dr. Pierce was our faculty, and he said about making the right decisions. It is also about how you make the right decisions. So the how is very important. And then I also quoted myself in most of my articles way back to 2009 or so. I brought up this concept of the 2 sides of the coin, because if the 2 sides of the coin are not present, the coin cannot be a valid legal tender. So if you look, okay, we don't use coins in Nigeria that much these days, but we use notes. Even the notes that we use also have 2 sides. So if you pick any Naira note, or in fact any currency for that matter, you pick the note, you will discover that if the 2 sides of that note must be in place. If anyone is missing, you will not have a valid legal tender. The same is applicable in governance. There are 2 sides to this coin called corporate governance. The first one has to do, and not necessarily first, but one has to do with the issue of the processes, the laws, the policies, the structures, what we call the structural indicators, the things that we're trying to comply with. If you don't comply with CAMA, you cannot be doing good corporate governance, because CAMA is foundation, is like a foundation upon which you are building. Governance is a best practice that is now improving on the foundation. So you cannot improve on the foundation without having the foundation in place. And then, and the other side then is the commitment, the spirit of governance, because I've seen instances in which people are able to check the box of those structural indicators. So you come to an organization and they say, separate chair and CEO, and you tick the box, yes. They do have a separate chairman and CEO. Okay, does the board have an audit committee? Yes. The chairman is not a member of any committee? Yes. And you tick, 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 and yet there isn't good corporate governance, because they are merely checking the boxes of governance without meeting the spirit of good corporate governance. So it's important to understand why the things, those indicators are there. When you have an understanding of why they are there, then you'll be able to best implement them within the spirit of true corporate governance to achieve the true leading best practices that you want to have in place so that you have a good governance framework. So now we come finally to the pillars and the principles. So again, it was from Dr. Pierce that I heard the acronym Raft, and I loved it. Raft being for the 4 pillars of corporate governance: responsibility, accountability, fairness, and transparency. And really, for someone that I live in the Lekki area, and by God's grace, I built a house in the Lekki area. And one of the key things that anybody who has wisdom and is trying to build a house in the Lekki area needs to know is the importance of a raft foundation. If you don't have a proper raft foundation, your 3-bedroom house can suddenly become 2 bedrooms. I beg your pardon. A 3-story house can suddenly become 2 stories, and then move from 2 stories to 1 story, and then finally the house can actually disappear. If you think I'm joking, try it. So Raft foundation is very important, and so also the foundation of the foundation of responsibility, accountability, fairness, and transparency for governance. That is a very key foundation for corporate governance. And then I've extended this to the principles and concepts, which are now called Raft here, by adding the remaining 3 principles that make up, because actually there are 7 principles and there are 4 pillars, but the 7 principles also contain the 4 pillars. So I've extended it to call it Raft here, and then you have independence, very, very key principle: independence, ethical conduct and integrity, as well as reputation and reputational risk. One of the most difficult things to rebuild after it's lost is reputation. And yet it takes so long to build it in the first place. So these things are very important to take note of, the Raft and the Raftier. And then, of course, the KPMG came up with this framework, which also brings up many of those principles we saw in the Raft and Raftier. So you see accountability right there, you see fairness right there, transparency, disclosures, conflict of interest, related party transaction. Okay. Now, if you are not fair to your employees, if a company is not fair to its employees, then it's not going to be doing good corporate governance. Even if it thinks it's fair to its employees, but it's not fair to its customers, then it's also not going to be doing good corporate governance. One thing is that they are linked, actually, because your employees will invariably treat your customers the way you treat them. Okay, so where all these things are missing, companies will fail. And there are reasons, some various reasons why a company could fail. Failure of fiduciary responsibility, conflict of interest, and lack of poor ethical leadership, lack of independence or groupthink, or the presence of groupthink, poor or no commitment by directors, excessive rather than effective oversight, and so on and so forth. But I want to state there, an unempowered company secretary or poor support by the company secretary. I'm so happy that Bidemi is here, because it would be interesting for her to also throw a bit more light on those aspects, you know. Then the absence of a good attitude to board evaluation, or a checkbox attitude, you know, because board evaluation is now a necessity under the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance. Many organizations are doing it, but they are not really truly committed to it. Okay, so having the wrong attitude to board evaluation is as good as not having good board evaluation in place. You should have board evaluation from the perspective of the true benefits, and with a view to actually implementing the outcomes of your board evaluation process. And we were fortunate to have also helped in some instances with board evaluation because of confidentiality. We can't mention names, but the point is that corporate governance, if nothing is measured, nothing gets done. So it's very, very important that things are properly measured and accounted for, so that at the end of the day, there is proper oversight by the board, and the board is conscious of where things are going wrong. Because when the board evaluates itself, it can see what it's getting right and know how to do more of the things it's getting right. And it can also identify the things that are not being done well. Then there are other consequences of poor corporate governance. Of course, there will be organizational failure. People will lose their investments. Jobs will be lost. Reputations will be lost. And remember what I said earlier about reputation being very hard to build and very easy to lose. And of course, jail term, I mean, Dr. Nosike can tell you, so many examples of organizations where directors have actually gone to jail. I mean, not only Enron, I think we are all familiar with Enron, but there are so many, even here in Nigeria. Interestingly, it wasn't just about jail time. There was also suicides that took place, both in the Enron matter and in others. So, let me not say in others, especially in the Enron matter in particular, but others are now taking a cue to learn from it. And I'd like Doc to share with us about some of the times when we have both gone to train organizations, and having heard what happened in the Enron matter because of what happened to people's pensions, some employees, senior management, they revolted. They said, we're not going to allow this to happen in our own case, and so on. So you can imagine where people have worked for 30 years and they are retiring and they are looking forward to their pension, and at the end of the day, there'll be nothing to show for it. So our own code, highlights this in number one principle, which talks about not just the presence of a board. And I keep highlighting this thing. It is not the presence of a board of directors that makes a company successful. It is the presence of an effective board. I just paused for a minute to allow that sink in. Because we all think that, okay, we have a board of directors, check. It is not just about having a board of directors, it's about having an effective board, okay? And then, of course, there are various parties that need to play key roles. The issue of balance of skills and diversity, including experience and gender, and without compromising competence, independence, and integrity are key as well. And then, of course, the chairman's role in eliciting constructive contributions. We have seen chairmen who think that they are generals, or if you like, school principals, and that their colleagues on the board are their students who cannot speak without their permission. It is not so. The chairman is first among equals. And where the chairman does not recognize his responsibility, things can go very wrong. And I would like Bidemi to also think about how can we help chairmen play this role? Because the board secretary has a lot of role to play in the attitude or the way that the chairman conducts his meeting. How can we help the chairman play his role in a way that elicits the best, because this balance of skills and diversity, if we have this skills and diversity on the board, but board members cannot express themselves during the board meeting, then the company will just be paying money and not getting any value. So it will not make sense at all. Okay. So what are the challenges for corporate governance in 2020 and beyond? Of course, I deliberately did not put COVID as my first challenge, because I know if we start with COVID, we'll probably not discuss any of the others. Okay, but there are various issues that boards must be mindful of in the 20s and beyond. And one of them is increasing role in the demand, increasing demand on the role of the board and directors. There's increasing demand. Directors are now being sent to jail. People used to think before that, corporate governance was a nice to have. But we come to the point where people now realize that corporate governance is not a nice to have, it's a must have. In fact, it was in 2012 that I wrote an article, the must have that is corporate governance. And I remember even way back then, people were like, you are too idealistic. Corporate governance. Well, it can be for America and Europe, in Anglo-Saxon communities, but here in Africa, corporate governance. But look at it today. Corporate governance, we're holding this launch conversation by ESQ because of the significance and importance of corporate governance. So there's increasing demand on directors. There's also the emergence of independent directors. Even the newcomer has now mentioned independent directors. There's the issue of board diversity and board evaluation, which we have all seen that is a key catalyst for good corporate governance and for successful companies. There's, of course, culture, conduct, and conflict of interest. You see, if I can actually put the tone at the top there as well, because the truth of the matter is that no matter what you tell the organization, no matter what you tell the management or the staff or any other person, if the board is not walking the talk, it's not going to work. That's just as simple as that. So the culture, the board culture, the ethical culture from the boardroom, the conduct of directors, what are employees seeing as they see directors coming and go. And Doc will speak about this issue of directors, or we see them when they come, and then after they've gone, we know, the meeting must have finished. Doc will talk about that, about the culture. Back again to this issue of chairman. And Doc, I would like you to also make an input in that, because situations where chairmen think that other directors ought to say what aligns with what they think have also been known to happen. And from the perspective of somebody who is a chairman of a board, at least one board, and not to mention several others on which you've been vice chair and so on, you can talk to us practically from that. Then investor protection. How do we protect investors? There's the issue of cybersecurity and data privacy, okay? And there's issues of data and analytics. Not to leave out emerging technologies. How can these emerging technologies be deployed in supporting protection of investors? I'm sure Bidemi also does as well, because your company is a very big multinational with a lot of investors to protect, and your investors will be these issues of privacy and the rest. Then COVID-19 is a reality that we have all had to face. And just as 2020 was ending and we're all giving a sign that this year 2020 is finally gone, thinking that COVID would go with it, we entered into a new dimension of COVID. So, is it here to stay? And what is the way forward? And there's so much, Doc and I were having a conversation this afternoon. There's so much conversation around this issue and suspect or suspicion towards the issue of vaccines or lack of vaccines, different kinds of things that can be done to prevent the COVID attack. The other day, and maybe we were talking about the use of onion, garlic, ginger, lemon, and of course the steam inhalation. So we human beings have developed different things for ourselves to either prevent the COVID or to attack the COVID, and then some think that the vaccine is a long-term solution. But why the controversy around the vaccines and so on? So that has to do also with risk management and oversight. And then this risk management is going beyond our own organizations, but also going to our geopolitical environment and indeed our global environment. How do we address all this? And of course, there is the impact of corruption and financial crimes. And then I'm sure Doc can speak to that, because you're a certified anti-corruption professional, just like myself. And then increasing legislation, as more and more, are we going to be able to keep tag of this legislation? It's like we need to keep, and yet we don't even go to our offices anymore. We're working from home, of course, which is part of our COVID solution and all that. How do you even stay on top of what Corporate Affairs Commission released a set of regulations for that to be CAMA, and somebody was calling me frantically. I heard that there's a new. Do you have it? These are things. How do practitioners keep on top of these changes as they happen? Then, of course, there's strategic risk and disruptions, compliance, capital and liquidity. So these are some of the challenges I decided to bring to the fore for us for these conversations. I'm going to quickly run to the end because I've already taken up enough time, and I'd like the panelists to begin to dig their hands and legs and their teeth into some of these issues. So please, I want you to bear in mind the issue of corporate culture, ethical tone at the top, as you discuss, role of executives and others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nechi. I think it's just been very interesting listening to you. I'm going to start by first saying that I really like the definitions of corporate governance that you have spoken about. They are popular and very important. But there was a particular quote from Al Tricker that caught my attention recently. When it says that if management is running the business, ensuring that the business is run, then corporate governance is seeing to it that it is run properly. So it's not really about running the business. And I know that businesses tend to focus on, that business operations. Our business must, thrive. We must make profit. We must deliver on our KPIs, and we must, we must earn our bonuses and all of that. But what corporate governance really looks at is ensuring that, these businesses are actually run properly and they're run sustainably, because there are many organizations that, have existed, and they've existed and they've been quite popular, and in their heydays, they were known all over the place. But what you then find is a few years down the line, you look at that same or those organizations and they're nowhere to be found. Nobody wants to have worked for an organization that is, used to exist, but stopped existing at some point. So I believe you brought to the fore the very, very critical principles around ensuring that organizations are properly run. I'm going to touch on, first of all, the role of the company secretary, because I happen to be one. And I know that typically people, especially because of that word secretary, people just tend to look down on that role, and they sort of feel, your work is to write the minutes and to make sure all the board papers are, are in place and all of that. That's admin, and it's good. I'm also a chartered administrator, and I'm very proud of it. However, I feel that company secretaries have a vantage role they play, and they have to understand the role they play to be able to play it. So if you go into a board with the mindset of you are the secretary of that board, that is how you will be treated, and that's how you will operate. But if you go into the board saying that I am like the right-hand man for the right-hand person for the chairman, and I'm here to ensure, that this organization is properly run in alignment with the board agenda, then you are going to play a more important role. You find out that even the board will trust you with a more critical role of ensuring that, all the things that, Dr. Nechi was also talking about, checking the box. So it will not just be about checking the box, but doing the right things, making the right decisions, making the right calls for the organization. So it starts with the company secretary, himself or herself, because, it's not, even though there are many ladies who are company secretaries, it's not a ladies' role. It's, there are men who have also run that office, effectively. So it comes with the mindset that you bring into it, and also the skills now. So you have to know your onions, all these things that Dr. Nechi was talking about. And I know that one of the things that ESQ wanted us to discuss were corporate governance trends in 2020 and the ones that are evolving in 2021. They couple, one of them is the stakeholder, a move away from shareholder supremacy or primacy to stakeholder considerations. That has been ongoing for a while, but no time did it really come to the fore as in 2020 when we had the crisis. And you know that what happened with the COVID-19 is to help us accelerate some of these things that, we've been talking about. You say it to your board, or you say it to, generally, and people think, oh, you're just trying to be too prim and proper and all of that. But, when the crisis came, people knew that, they had to reinvent, they had to survive, they had to, the business had to continue. So what do we need to do? So some of the trends that came through globally from my own point of view is focusing more on the social and the environmental aspects of the ESG. So the ESG has been ongoing for a while, environmental, social, and governance reporting. And even the Nigerian Stock Exchange reporting is based on, the ESG framework. And while we've tended to focus on the governance aspect, the social and the environmental you cannot take it away, from good corporate governance in terms of recognizing, the social aspects of business. And I think that really came to fore during the COVID-19 era, because businesses now had to think not just about business continuity and the business being run properly, but also elements of making sure that employees, the welfare of the employees, they're taken care of, the welfare of the community as a whole. What do we do to make sure that we're also impacting the society, the environment where we live in? And obviously all the environmental concerns, the things around global warming, how are businesses impacting the environment, and what are they doing about it? Those were some of the trends that came through in 2020. Another important one is corporate purpose, being able to sharpen your corporate purpose and making sure that the corporate purpose is not just around pleasing the shareholders. It's very important, to ensure that shareholders have their return on investment. But there are multiple critical stakeholders to the running of a business or running of an organization that boards have had to now begin to think about, in their discussions, and then to look at whether their corporate purpose actually takes care of all these other critical stakeholders. So, that was also a trend, and it's going to continue into into 2021. The other bit is around, focusing more on culture and human capital management. We got the news that my organization has been named as the first top employer in Africa, including Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and some African countries. And I know that my board will be extremely pleased with that news, because they've focused a lot around, what are you doing with the employees? Are you making sure you're retaining the right talent? What are you doing to make sure that this strategy that we've shared, we've reviewed, we've approved, you have the talent to be able to run it? So those are some of those trends that also came through in 2020, because you have to be sure that, people are building the right skills. The skills obviously changed with the COVID, so it wasn't just about being technical now, but, resilience, being resilient as well. And, also being able to do other things, because if you're just focused on your technical skills, you might not be able to survive in a COVID era or a post-COVID era, because now people are having to do multiple things in their organizations. And I think the last one I wanted to just talk about is also activism. So you see a lot of that, stakeholder activism, shareholder activism, because people are getting more aware of their rights, whether as investors or as creditors or as employees or as, in whatever form. So we're going to increasingly get inquiries from stakeholders asking us questions around, why have you done this? Why have you done that? Why is your result this way? We expected it, why, sort of questions. So very, very important trends that I've touched on. And I think at this point, I would just like to hand over to Dr. Nosike, because I know that this is his area and this is his forte as well. And then maybe come back later to speak more about other topics, as we progress. Dr. Nosike.
Thank you so much. And then you were quite right about the trends that we saw in 2020. And then especially also the fact that companies had to find a way around this issue of holding their AGM, because what the law said in terms of AGM, we found that it was not practicable in 2020, given the COVID situation we found ourselves in. But I love the word you used, resilience. That word resilience actually came to the fore with company secretaries, even with the regulators also sitting up and saying, okay, what do you guys suggest? How do we progress? And being open to some of those conversations. Yeah, you're right. Dr. Nosike is a very apt person to be on this panel. I actually insisted I had to be on this panel because, some of these conversations we're talking about, a lot of things that took place, he played direct roles in some of them. And when you were saying about company secretaries not only being women, I smiled because Dr. Chartered Secretary, Dr. Nosike is a Chartered Secretary as well, a past president of Nixon, and so on. So over to you. Thanks again.
All right. Bidemi and Nechi, thank you very much. This is an interesting, corporate governance. Corporate governance is always an interesting topic. And someone is asking a question, how do I become a chartered administrator and secretary? You go to the institute, or you can, just search ICSAN, Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria. You get all the details there. You have to register, but when you get the contact details, you speak to the registrar and they will take you through. It's fairly easy. Don't worry, you will be able to get it, take the exams and pass and qualify. So you can join us. Corporate Governor Bidemi, thanks. Nechi, thanks. It's interesting. I also want to pick something from what Bidemi said about ladies being company secretary, and particularly the point she made about don't look at yourself as secretary. look at yourself as a contributor, as a value-driven person. I was company secretary, and from company secretary, I became an executive director, head of legal. From there, I became executive director of operations, became executive director, in charge of Nigeria business. Eventually, I became managing director. So it's a matter of how you position yourself. If you limit yourself to the role of company secretary while you are delivering that job, you will never go beyond that level. So it's important for us to recognize that. Now, I'm pleased that I have two ladies who have a wide experience in corporate governance. And so if I make mistakes, I'm sure they'll draw me back. Now, I will start from the point of view of stakeholders' perspective, which Nechi and Bidemi talked about, because COVID-19 has introduced quite a lot of things. Some people were still neck deep into shareholders' perspective to corporate governance, produce profit and pay dividends, and we're happy. But it has gone beyond that now. With COVID-19, we've seen that governance structures and frameworks have changed to extensively cover other stakeholders who were not really fully covered previously. Because now, whatever your entity does impacts on other stakeholders. I mean, we read about a case in Australia and even in the US as well, where a group of stakeholders took directors to court for lack of oversight. These stakeholders said, look, we didn't think that you provided adequate oversight. And that was a failure of governance. So, and it was not just employees, a group of stakeholders who did it. So stakeholders are becoming more interested in what is going on in their organizations. And then also, extending it to the point about the impact of COVID on this, on governance. We have also seen in the UK where some persons visited offices and contracted COVID-19 and they sued the company, and the company did not invite them to come. They visited the company, but they contracted it, and they said, you had an obligation to protect us as stakeholders. So you can see that the issue is not just about producing profit, but also making sure that the interest of other stakeholders are paramount. And Bidemi and Nechi actually talked about sustainability. Now, environmental sustainability has become a hot topic now because companies now face health and safety risks as a result of COVID and matters relating to COVID. So even organizations that were a bit not so interested in the environment around the offices have become interested now because other stakeholders will be impacted. But I will move straight to the issue. I mean, Nechi had asked me to say a few things about a couple of things, that when governance fails, all stakeholders lose. And in the case of Enron, okay, I used to say this on some time ago when Lehman Brothers failed. I was on a train in London. Lehman Brothers were located at Canary Wharf. And when our train got to Canary Wharf station, very many people were getting on the train with little yellow boxes. So I took an interest in what I saw. So I said, man, why are you guys carrying these boxes? Say, our jobs are finished. These boxes were given to us to pick our personal belongings in the office to go. I said, where? He said, Lehman Brothers. What happened? Oh, haven't you heard about Lehman Brothers? That was the failure of governance that led to loss of jobs by many people. And when one person, particularly in this environment, loses his or her job, almost 10 persons in a family have lost their jobs. So what happened in Enron that Nechi talked about, the government of US tried to suppress that because they invested a lot of money, the pension assets, in the securities of Enron. And when Enron collapsed, those monies that were invested on behalf of staff for their pensions were lost. So even those who had spent several years, 30 years, 35 years, lost their pensions, and many of them committed suicide. So when Nechi and I were conducting a training program for board and senior management for a very big bank in this country. And we gave this example of the consequences of failure of governance. You know, people committed suicide at Enron. And we had a tea break. And one of the senior managers walked up to me and said, that example you gave about Enron, is it true that people committed suicide? I said, yes. And then he said, well, we will not allow that to happen in this bank. We will definitely fight to ensure that corporate governance is properly practiced in this bank. So you can see that, just like Nechi and Bidemi said, it's not about having corporate governance framework, it's about making sure that it works. And Nechi talked about the principle 1 of the Nigerian Corporate Governance Code 2018, having an effective board. The issue is not about having a board, but having an effective board. One of the general managers of an insurance company called me last week. Something was going on in the company. And in the course of the discussions, I found that they did not actually have an effective board. The chairman was fully in control. The chairman decided whatever was going to happen. So other members of the board did not know. And then I said to the young man, is it possible for me to speak to one of those directors, particularly the non-executive directors? And his question was, what would you like to say to him? I said, the fact that they are not interested in what is going on in the company means that they are open to consequences, including liabilities. And these liabilities can endanger the reputation they've built for very many years, and that they may go to jail. Again, Nechi talked about jail terms. There are very many directors in this country who have gone to jail. This is a very sensitive matter that I don't want to mention their names. But at one of the events we had, Nechi, you will recall, when I mentioned a training we had, someone said, I know the company and I know the man who went to jail, one of the trainees. You know, so it's important for us to ensure that the right thing is done. What should we do? Nechi and Bidemi have talked about the issues, about the pillars of corporate governance to make sure that those things are properly done. The company secretary, yes, we expect the company secretary to do a very good job. But sometimes you'll find that the company secretary will be frustrated by the fact that the directors are not acting in ways that will ensure that the right things are done in terms of corporate governance. You have the board charter. You have to push some of them to read the board charter. You have to push them to read policies. You even have to push for policies that are outdated to be amended and reviewed. You know, so we're speaking to people that we believe should understand and do the right thing. Because it's not just the directors that will suffer if corporate governance fails. All the stakeholders will, and this is why when Nechi talked about the fact of the chairman has a major role to play. Board dynamics. If the chairman is not able to manage board proceedings and dynamics properly, there may be a problem. And this is why we always canvass the position, the argument, that the chairman should not necessarily be the longest serving director on the board. The chairman must be someone who has the skills and the capability to run the board, because you need to run that board and run it very well. All right, so the chairman has got the skills, and that takes me to the point of composition of the board, which is one of the things trending. The issue of composition of the board featured extensively last year, 2020, and is going to be a major thing this year, because as COVID is impacting on processes, particularly governance processes, you need to structure your board in a way that you will have the scale, those who have the skills, those who can, you know, do things to change the system. You don't have to wait until the regulator comes and says you must do this. No, you need to be ahead of regulation. All right? Regulators are under pressure. Some of them are issuing regulations, and it's only after issuing regulations they realize that there are mistakes. So they are under pressure. But you need, like the newcomer has come out, and we have seen the newcomer prescribing a certain minimum for independent directors for PLCs. Very many of us think that that's not really what should have been the case, but it's a law and we have to comply. But the point that I'm trying to make is the chairman has a major, I'm happy that Nechi emphasized that fact. So there are very many governance issues. Nechi also emphasized the issue of emerging technologies, and that's IT governance. For instance, we're having this, event virtually, but we know that as a result of the extensive use of IT, as a result of COVID, cybersecurity risks have gone up. All right. So there has to be, for companies, organizations that did not have IT governance properly structured and defined, they now need to have IT governance. They have internal audit. One of the key things was last year with governance was risk-based internal audit plans. Now there's going to be more because the different areas of risk have emerged. So we have health and safety. So organizations will now begin to look at the issues of health and safety. Nechi talked about risk management and all the impact of corruption. Corruption has eaten deep into the fabric of our system in this country. And private organizations and the public sector are also involved. So what is the impact of corruption on governance? What this simply means is that if corruption is not checked, you are not likely to deliver on the purpose. Bidemi talked about corporate purpose. You cannot deliver on the corporate purpose if you don't check the impact of corruption. So what should you do? You need to develop anti-corruption compliance programs. Thank God that Nechi is an expert in this area. Anti-corruption compliance programs that will enable you to ensure that whatever corruption that is trying to rear its ugly head in the entity will be checked before they endanger consequences that you cannot control. So the impact of corruption is one. You need to develop policies like the gift and hospitality policy, because in most cases, it's the absence of the gift and hospitality policy that leads to serious problems about corruption. You also need to look at your code of conduct policy, code of conduct. You have to look at your conflict of interest policy. Nechi and I share this view that although the conflict of interest policy says you disclose, and then the board will ask you to excuse them, and then they take a decision. The view that we both share is that you should endeavor not to be involved in conflict of interest in the first place. Don't just bother about the fact that the procedure says you disclose, because at the end of the day, you will find that there's a major problem. All right, so when we talk about the impact of corruption and allied matters, we also take it to the point of shadow directors, those who are outside of the board, who are controlling the board. They tell board members what to do, and this is why board members must be persons who are reasonably independent. Nechi talked about that. Who can stand up and say, we will not allow this to happen, Mr. Chairman. If this happens, this company will go this way. And Bidemi actually talked about that. A strong company secretary is also needed to be able to do that. So again, with regards to the issue of I have to talk about financial integrity, financial statements integrity. Are you interested in the purity of the details of your financial statements? Again, that's a major rule for the board. Most boards have a lot of liabilities flowing to them as a result of not paying adequate attention to financial statements integrity. What do? Your board committees. You need to set up very good board committees. One of them is the audit committee. So corporate culture also comes in, like Nechi said. Corporate culture, also pointed that. Because of what has happened and what happened last year with COVID, the corporate culture of many organizations will just have to change. And then the culture, personal cultures, and the leadership culture of organization will also have to change. Turn at the top. We now need, you will agree with me that, in the past, prior to COVID, most companies had this timetable of 4 board meetings in a year, 1 in a quarter. But I can tell you that last year, after COVID, many companies held more than 15 board meetings. So that's a pressure point. And the board must begin to now look at their cultures differently. Otherwise, they may not be able to results that they intend to achieve. So the last thing I'll talk about for now will be sustainability. Nechi talked about the pillars. You have the economic pillar, You have to make profit. If you don't make profit, the business may not be sustainable. So you need to work to make a profit, all right? But while you are making profit, you also have the social pillar. You need to ensure that the environment is clean and that the environment is sustainable, all right? And then you have governance. Bidemi talked about ESG. Fortunately, the social side of ESG is expanding and has now included civil rights. Now, what that simply means is that organizations will have to be very careful and ensure that they manage ESG processes to ensure that the right things are done. Ethical investment is becoming a very important thing. Ethical investment simply means that you are not investing monies from corrupt practices. You are investing what I may call clean monies. Very many foreign investors, institutional investors, are not keen on determining that investments are ethical. If your organization is not properly run in line with corporate governance, those who believe in ethical investment will not come. And if they don't come, your corporate governance processes may not move to the next level. So it's important for us to recognize all the points that Nechi has made, the points that Bidemi has made, and to say that if you practice good governance, good corporate governance, your company is not likely to fail. If you practice wrongly, the company is a matter of time. The company will go down. Bidemi talked about the fact of companies that existed for many years and disappeared. Look at what CNN has been showcasing. Companies that have been there for 100 years, 150 years, 200 years. Why are they still there? Good corporate governance. Why have some companies in Nigeria, particularly banks, disappeared? Poor corporate governance. So in order for us to protect ourselves as officers of organizations, protect our directors, protect our employees, protect our country, and protect our regulators, because we also need to help the regulators to do their jobs well, we have to design a good corporate governance system and make them work very well. So I'll stop here for now, Nechi and Bidemi.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Well said.
Thank you very much. I think we're having a very interesting conversation. Tosin would like to open up the floor for questions, if there are any. Bidemi, did you want to add any line, or will you take it along with questions?
I think I'll take along with questions, although there was one point around JV governance that I wanted to touch on, and the fact that, you know, there's increasing scrutiny and increasing demand for JVs, even though they're usually overlooked. I think a lot of the emphasis have always been on public listed entities, but increasingly we're finding out that there's lots of capital investments in JVs, that if they are also not run properly, you know, they would impact on multiple stakeholders. You know, Dr. Nosike talked about people that commit suicide, people that, you know, if someone loses his or her job, you know, it affects the entire family, you know, and so increasingly people are looking at JVs and how they are governed. And I think that the very important things that JVs need to look at is, first of all, strategy, you know, to have a clear and robust strategy that has been approved, that has been reviewed, input into, and approved by the board. So a lot of the JV companies, when you do some sort of digging, you don't really find that existing. So very, very, very important to have a clear strategy to ensure that the right matters are being brought to the attention of the board. The board should actually demand, you know, that the management of those JVs bring to the board, you know, matters that would ensure the board to have the right oversight over JV companies. The other bit is around making sure that, you know, the conversations at JV board meetings go beyond just strictly the financials to the long-term sustainability of that organization. How is this JV going to endure and continue to exist despite all the risks and opportunities that are available. So really, really breaking down the risk and the opportunities that are available for the JVs. Those needs to be considered by the board, those needs to be reviewed and also monitored, by the board regularly. And I think that as we begin to make, even though they might not be as regulated as public companies, as they begin to also bring in their own framework, because I think Dr. Nichi talked about that exhaustively, to have a framework of governance rather than just ticking the box, but making sure that we also want this company, or we want this JV to endure into the future, having the framework that works despite people leaving and coming back in. There's a framework that continues to work and continues to ensure that the JV companies endure into the future, long term, and for the long-term benefits of all its stakeholders. I think that I just wanted to mention before we go into questions.
Okay, thank you, Bidemi. Thank you, Doc. And one of the things Doc talked about, the issue of ethical investment, it reminded me of a potential client who had approached him, and we were going to do some work for this client because they had opportunity of investment from a huge international body. And then they found that they didn't have their corporate governance structures, frameworks in place. And so they wanted us to come in and help them develop that. But in the course of everything, they lost out. Why did they lose out? Because the people who were going to invest did not find it very particularly interesting that it was at this point they were now going to put in place corporate governance systems and framework, and in the interim, the COVID thing came into the picture and they lost out. You see, so the importance of organizations being proactive in implementing corporate governance cannot be overstated. The business case for corporate governance is massive, massive. And of course, we talked about the dangers of not having good corporate governance. So it's important that this launch hour being for board secretaries, being for legal advisors, being for different people, HR managers and so on, who are in a position to advise their organizations. It's important that they bring to their attention the need to begin now to put in place what is missing. We talk about the issue of board evaluation. We talk about the issue of, and like Doc touched on some of the policies, all those policies are provided for in our Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018. In fact, that code has like about 26 policies that need to be in place in an organization. And and not just putting them in place, but also making sure that they are reviewed from time to time. And the board has to make sure that those things are done, and the board needs to be advised. In many instances, when we train the boards, we discover that board members rarely read the codes. They rarely read the codes. It's always the board secretary. Yes, Bidemi is smiling and shaking her head. Very true, because it's always the secretary who has to, do if you like, an executive summary for them to read, so that they will even have some knowledge as to what is in the code. So there's a lot of work for board secretaries. There's a lot of work for legal advisors. There's a lot of work for those who support the boards, stakeholders in this. We're all stakeholders to ensure that because ignorance, again, we know that ignorance of the law is not an excuse at law. So it's better not to be caught on the side of ignorance. It should not even be an issue, an excuse at all. So I have a question, and I'd like others to please send in their questions quite quickly, because we're at the question and answer segment now. This question says, to commence a career in corporate governance, what should be the first step I take? I'm a young lawyer and very much interested in the field. So Doc, please, can you tell a young lawyer who is very much interested in the field of corporate governance, what should be the first step he takes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I also saw the question. There are very many steps, first steps that you can take, but the key one is for you to register and become a student of ICSAN, take the exam. Fortunately, you're a lawyer. There are 16 subjects on the ICSAN syllabus, but as a lawyer, you'll be required to take only 4. So 12, you will have exemptions. And those 4, very many lawyers have taken the 4 once and passed and qualified as chartered secretaries. And I'm sure you can do it. If you can't take all the 4 at a sitting, you can split them. Take 2 at a diet in June and take the other 2 the next diet in December. And if you work hard, you will make it. Now, why am I talking about registering to be a student of ICSAN? ICSAN is making every effort to change its name like its sister institutes abroad. The ICSA, which was the parent institute of ICSAN, Nigeria, the name is now the Governance Institute. The Governance Institute in the UK, fully recognized, chartered by the government of the UK. The equivalent institute in several other countries in Ireland, they've changed their names as well to the Governance Institute. And we're working to secure a change of our name. If that happens, then the institute will become the Institute for Corporate Governance. So it's important that you join now so that you take advantage of the benefits that flow from there. I hope I've been able to deliver on what you expect me to say, Nechi.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, Doctor, that you know, one of the things ICSAN also does that is very interesting is the they call it it's like you can do internships at companies. All right, so there's the ICSAN internship that is very good. So you come in as an intern, because this is someone asking a question about how to start a career in corporate governance. So you kind of work with the company through the process, because you can read the books, you can pass the exams, but when you practically do like an internship in a company that is you know, facilitated by ICSAN, you see it live and direct. You touch it, you feel it, you see all these things we've talked about today. You can actually experience, and you begin to understand, oh, that's why, that was why this was said in my textbook and all of that. So I think that's also something you can benefit from being a student and a graduate of ICSAN.
I agree. And I think BDME has been one of the champions of the internship, and they've been taking some of our new members to become interns. I know that they've done it, PZ has done it, a couple of companies have done it, and she's made the point, and it's very important. Nechi, there's another question. Someone said he passed all the exams in 2014, but has not had induction. It's a very simple thing. Go to the institute or call them, call the registrar, and apply to be part of the next induction. It's as simple as that. You pay the fees and you'll be inducted. I'm surprised that 6 years after you qualify, you've not inducted. That means you don't have the ACIS. You need the ACIS. You need to showcase it. You need to tell people that you're a chartered secretary. So please talk to the registrar and apply to join the next induction.
Yes, thank you for that, Doc. There's another question here. The person says, good afternoon. I'm very excited to have been part of this event. Thank you very much. Due to some circumstances, I had some interruptions. Can I please have access to the presentations or other materials? Oh, okay. That's not my area. Yes, Q. But the other question I'd like to ask, somebody else also asked, can a lawyer become a contract manager in a telecommunications company and still hold ICSAN certification? Bidemi, do you want to take that? Can a lawyer become a contract manager in a telecom company and still hold ICSAN certification?
Definitely so, because the certification is distinct and separate from your work experience. So when you get the certification, you can then decide that you want to acquire the experience with it. And that's what we're talking about. One of the ways to achieve the work experience is the internship program. So, but definitely you can be, when I did my own exam, I was a very junior lawyer. So I wasn't really doing much of corporate governance. I had not become a company secretary, but I was assisting the company secretary in some way. And because it was something that I was very interested in, even when she didn't give me the work, I would offer to help in terms of, you know, making arrangements for the meetings and all of that. So yes, you can be a contract manager in a telecoms organization, but you can still achieve your ICSAN certification, and you can still seek out the experience and exposure that builds you up as a corporate governance professional.
Richie, there's a question on what can a company secretary who is being stifled by the board do?
Yes. And Bidemi, please, can you speak to that?
I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Stifled by the board. When a company secretary is being stifled by the board, what should he do?
Oh, stifled. Oh, really? Okay, yes. What should the company secretary do? I think what you can do as a company secretary is to have one-on-one engagements, you know, have a conversation with your chairman, you know, and explain your role. Explain that you are not there, you know, you are there to really support him, because when the chairman sees that you are there to support him and to help him, you know, with the board agenda and have an effective board, he or she will see you differently. So have that conversation, book that time and have that conversation, have your conversation with your managing director as well. When you have the buy-in of your chairman, then there's no more stifling. Because what I typically see is that when your chairman is on your side and you're saying something, the chairman will say, please, let's listen to the professional. Let's listen to the, you know. I had a case at some point in my career where one of my directors, I was saying that we needed to disclose a conflict of, not a conflict of interest situation, but an interest in transaction. So, and the director didn't want to, because he was affected. And then I just brought the rule, I brought the reason why, the position of the law. And then my chairman just said, we listened to all the arguments. So the director said his own part, and I said my bit. And then the decider was the chairman, because the chairman just said, we're going to listen to Bidemi because she's our compliance manager professional. That's the reason why she's on this board. And that day, I think that was the day that I felt proudest about my career as a company secretary. So I think that it's important, you know, to have that buy-in. If you try that and it doesn't work, then you just look for another job somewhere else where, you know, the board is more respectful of the role of the company secretary. So
but why should a company secretary be stifled? Why should a company secretary allow himself or herself to be stifled? You shouldn't. That's the point that Bidemi is making. You know, if you create value and board members see that you are always creating value, they will call you all the time. You will even get tired of receiving calls from them because they call you even when they have personal issues. They call you. And sometimes you get surprised that they go beyond official matters. For instance, they have personal legal matters. They call you because they know you create value all the time. So if you create value and you provide information to them, and this takes me to the point of induction, always insist, that's the starting point to getting the directors to appreciate your value. Organize an induction program for every director. If you have 2 directors who have been appointed, insist that you organize induction. If you have only 1, insist. That idea of wait until we have another director, please don't ever accept that, because that other director may not come in the next 3-4 years. But when you organize induction for directors, it's an opportunity for them to know you. It's an opportunity for you to showcase who you are and what you can do, and make sure that the induction program is properly drafted. It's not a matter of, okay, let's show you around. No, showcase, show them that you are there to help them. Show them that you are there to protect them. With that, they will always come back to you, and nobody will stifle you. Nobody will do that.
Thank you
Very
for
well
that.
said.
In fact, I was going to actually chip in to say that, at the end of the day, it's about value. It's about value proposition. And if your board perceives you as adding value, nobody's going to try to stifle you. It's not going to be from day one, because you have to earn that respect. You have to demonstrate that you're actually offering value, and they have to see it. And then from then on, like Doc said, they will even invite you to help them with personal challenges. How much more with board-related matters? I mean, I've had that experience. I was on a company secretary of the board many years ago, and there was a disagreement between the chair and the CEO, and the chair wanted the CEO out, and it was not on the agenda for the board meeting, but they were kind of trying to smuggle it in through the back door. But I said, no, this can't happen. This is not right. This is not the proper process. And the chairman wanted to shut me down, obviously, because I wasn't saying what he wanted to hear.
Okay.
But when the directors realized what I was saying, and I was showing them, they immediately said, we have to listen, just like you said. Listen to our board secretary. We have to listen to our board secretary, because it would be terrible for this matter to go to court. And she says this is what she told us, and we didn't listen.
Dr. Next, there's another question.
Yes, another question. It appears the regulatory bodies only pay lip service to corporate governance when it comes to private limited company. Why is this so? And what measures are being put in place to ensure that small and medium-scale companies also abide by the principles of corporate governance? Yeah, Doc, go ahead.
Well, the issue is not about paying lip service, really. It's very difficult for me now to understand exactly what you're talking about. But the point is that some regulators, sorry, just a minute. Daniel, go back to that man. Go back to that place. Making sure that the right things are done, and that she said at the beginning, it's not about waiting for regulation. It's not about waiting for the code. There are international best practices. You must be ahead of regulation. So even when a regulator, you believe that a regulator is not getting to the threshold of governance in terms of regulations, you must go beyond the boundaries that the regulator has set. But having said that, I do not think that any regulator will intentionally pay lip service to the issue of corporate governance. Perhaps one can say that the issue of control and the mechanisms for control of corporate governance have not been properly put in place, but they are being done now. For instance, the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018 prescribed that the Financial Reporting Council will monitor compliance. And the Financial Reporting Council has now come up with a reporting template that all companies that are subject to compliance with the provisions of the Nigerian Corporate Governance Code 2018 will now have to use that template to indicate and report to the Financial Reporting Council how they have applied the different principles, all the 28 principles of the Nigerian Corporate Governance Code 2018. So that's a step in the right direction. And some private companies are covered by this code, Nigerian Corporate Governance Code 2018. The Central Bank of Nigeria code for banks, they are also banks, private limited, not PLCs. They are also covered. And I'm aware that the CBN is very serious when it comes to compliance. We also have corporate governance codes issued by the CBN for microfinance banks and some other DFIs. And these are private, predominantly private companies. And some of us are even saying that the huge compliance requirements, particularly for smaller ones like the microfinance banks, are heavy, and that the regulators should please look at them again. So it's a matter of, okay, maybe the regulator is not pursuing control and compliance as effectively as they should, but I can assure you that we're getting there. And very many regulators, for instance, the SEC has issued guidelines on the implementation templates, a form that is referred to as Form 01, which took effect from 1st of this month. And I can assure you that very many PLCs will start sweating when it comes to the issue of reporting on that. So again, some of us who are in this side of consultancy, governance consultants, Nechi will tell you, are also in touch with some of these regulators and their staff, and pushing and telling them that it is needed. I mean, that certain things are needed in certain areas to ensure that some of the gaps that exist are closed. And I'm sure they are listening. Nechi and I were involved in developing the template for reporting for Nigerian Corporate Governance Code 2018. And this is the way we can provide, value to the system. So I assure you that some of the regulators will not pay lip service. If there's any aspect of the corporate governance process where you believe that they pay lip service, please contact us privately and we'll take it up.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Doc. And I think the thing about corporate governance is that it's about your organization, about you choosing to have the right standard, choosing to have high standard, not seeking a mere regulatory compliance mindset, but actually implementing what we said earlier, the spirit of good corporate governance, because you believe in doing what is right, because it is what is the right thing to do. Okay, so we've had some comments from some people just expressing their pleasure with the program so far. We have barely 6 more minutes.
Nechi, I need to say thank you. Nechi, there are 2 key areas that I would like to say something briefly on.
Okay.
Because these are areas that have engendered problems for directors and some senior staff.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, the participants will need to understand that by virtue of the case of Bernard Longe and First Bank, that the standards of compliance by non-executive directors is the same as the standard of compliance by executive directors. So the non-executive directors who used to think that because they were not executive directors, the standard of the requirements that the regulators and the codes expect of them were less than those of the executive directors. You need to begin to advise them that the standard is the same. And the implication of this is that, non-executive directors must make sure that the right things are done. And that takes me to the point, another point that is very significant for officers, including the company secretary, governance persons, and that's the point about remuneration governance. Remuneration governance, that's also one aspect that engenders a lot of trouble for directors and leads to liabilities, including criminal liability. Now, how much are you paying? During COVID, there have been reductions in salaries. What has directors done? Have directors also looked at the allowances and the remuneration of directors? Have they looked at the issue of tax? Because sometimes they collect, all sorts of allowances. Some of these may be subject to tax. I know that we keep talking about sitting allowance is not subject to tax, but the Finance Act 2020 is very clear. So the point I'm making is, company secretaries, legal advisors, legal officers, please ensure that your directors understand what should be done so that they don't get into trouble. BDME pointedly address this point by saying company secretaries and legal officers must ensure that they advise and help their directors. And that's exactly, there's no point listening to what we're discussing if you will not practice or implement the things that we have talked about. And the way to achieve it is to, I know someone has asked, if they could get the presentation that Nechi made. I mean, I saw it. And it's up to ESQ practical lawyers to decide whether they want to do that. But I can assure you that you can reach Nechi. You can reach any of us anytime, privately. And sometimes it's not all about money. It's about education. It's about getting you to do your job better. And if you do your job better, we will be happy. We want very many people to join us, you know, so that we can advance the boundaries of corporate governance very well. That's what we think should happen. So from time to time, please feel free to call on us. And by the way, Nechi is referred to as Madam Governance. I hope you all know.
She is. And very well said, Doctor. I that point that you made about the same standard, equal standard of accountability by NEDs and EDs, they're very important. And one of the things that a company secretary must emphasize during the board induction, you know, when they're newly coming in, those are some of the important principles that you have to highlight to the incoming non-executive director or even executive director that is coming in, you know, to let them understand that it's not just about, I'm a member of the board, because people just take on board directorship. Oh, I want you to be a director of my company, and they jump at it, you know. That means I'll be well respected in the, you know, there are loads of responsibilities and accountabilities, and you can go to jail, you know, if something happens to that organization. So I think, you know, the point about induction cannot be overemphasized in really helping to rein in those points to incoming directors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nosike, and thank you, Bidemi. Thank you so much. I think you've actually more than done justice to today's session, or maybe I should say we have, frankly, you know, done justice to today's session. And what you said that cannot be overemphasized is that role that practitioners must play. And I thought Doc was going to that area where you know, we're talking about director and other officers' liability insurance. It does not cover some aspects. It only covers some other aspects, but that is a bit outside our scope today. What I want to also point out is that opportunity of taking advantage of knowledge. Doc mentioned that the Finance Act, any company secretary that studies properly the Finance Act and is able to advise the board on how what impact it has to their sitting allowance, what impact it has to their director's fees and all that, is already adding value. And we immediately earn the respect of the directors that will never have them stifling such a secretary. Okay, people want value. And also, any company secretary that properly inducts his board, you know, board members, whether they are coming in as individuals or they're coming in collectively, is also one that is taking proper advantage of the opportunity to do the work to which you are called. We're governance professionals as company secretaries. So let the company secretaries take on that responsibility, but you must have knowledge. I wrote an article a long time ago, the A to Z of being a company secretary. I still recommend it, but I can tell you one thing that I stated in that article, that having a board secretary that is empowered by the board, but is ignorant, is a disaster going somewhere to happen. So definitely there's no point, because all the codes are saying directors should empower company secretary, but an empowered company secretary who is ignorant is not going to help the board at all. So make sure you position yourself to be a secretary that can add value when so empowered. And in fact, the directors will see the value in empowering in the first place. I want to thank my
Nechi, can I give this last line?
Yes, please go ahead.
Directors, most directors are also members of other boards. All right. So when they come to your board, if the company secretary of one of the other boards is very good, and they come to your board and they find that you're not doing what that company secretary is doing, they will say, Mr. Chairman, no, that's not right. This is what should be done. We have our company secretary in this company. She knows what she should do. Yes. If it's the company secretary, this is what you should do. Once they say that, you're almost finished.
I'm telling you.
The same way, if you are very good, the directors will go to the other board and say, oh, our company secretary at Unilever is, look, I'll give you her number, call her to educate you on how to do your job. Once they say that to you, you are in trouble. So you must be on top of your job. And truly, what I've always canvassed is don't feel shy to call another company secretary to say, I have this problem. What do you think I should do? That company secretary will not laugh at you. The company secretary will be very happy to tell you, we have this same problem. This was the way we dealt with it. All right. So open up and reach out so that you'll be able to do your job well.
Thank you for that. Very practical solutions to some of the questions that have been raised. And yes, feel free to call Bidemi. She's, she's on the table. He's still doing the job of company secretary. She's seeing the challenges every day, just like the rest of you are. And you can also call Dr. Nosike and myself. We have both also been on that seat, and we continue to advise and train those on the seat. So we're quite comfortable with the current challenges that are being faced. And I want to thank ESQ for putting this afternoon lunch program together. And I hand back over to Tosin Sholanke to take us to the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nichi, Dr. Nusiki, and Mrs. Ademola. In fact, I can say that if we were in the physical gathering, I am sure that the audience would have given a standing ovation for today's conversation. It's been really rich, very insightful, well-researched, and well-packaged for all of us today. Like, I have really learned a lot, and I am sure that our audience, our participants have also learned a lot, and we are really grateful. We appreciate that, you know, even within the short time that we gave you, you took out time to prepare, and even out of your busy schedule, you even still took out time to spend almost 2 hours of your busy time with us. So we are really grateful. We appreciate your time. We are very, very grateful, and we hope that we will have you very soon on another panel, discussing on corporate governance too. And then we also want to say a very big thank you to our sponsors, G. Elias & Co. and Advocate Law Practitioners, why this webinar is possible today. Our audience, very big thank you to you. Thank you for taking out time to also participate in today's webinar. Please note our next webinar series on managing tax disputes in cross-border business operations will be coming up on Wednesday, 27th of January at 1 p.m. So we look forward to engaging those of you that are interested in taxation. We look forward to engaging you there. And as I mentioned earlier, registration is still ongoing for our 12-week distance learning course on power, titled The Dynamics of Power Contracts Regulation, Contract Negotiation, Documentation, Project. It commences on the 16th of February, 2021. So if you have need to get more information, you need to make some inquiries, send a mail to o.sholanke@esq-law.com. So thank you all for today. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation. Please enjoy the rest of your day.